Since the beginning of sports, game, and competition, once you get to the top of the ladder, you reach a limit where all your competition is so incredibly close to you in natural talent and skill that you have to start looking elsewhere to find a competitive advantage. For runners, it's steroids in the shoes. For esports gamers, it's mice and keyboard with insane tech. But what about Magic the Gathering players? What's our competitive advantage? Your first thought might be strong, broken cards, but you would be wrong. You see, Magic the Gathering is not some pedestrian street race or video game. Instead, it is a battle of wits, a game of equal parts luck and skill. And since we're playing against humans after all, if you know what you're doing, they can be manipulated like puppets on a string, which is why this deck only wins against children of divorce. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kind of a weird angle to go, but did you know that according to the CDC, 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce? And in a game of 4 people, 2 of them will be children of divorce. Now, of course, one of them could be you, but I'd still argue that you'll have a competitive edge over one of your opponents, which could be the difference between a loss and a victory. Our game plan is very simple. We're going to begin subtle, then slowly increase the intensity of our psychological, emotional manipulation until we finally break their spirit, because we're after that victory royale after all. Now, if it's not already abundantly clear, I'm kind of known as the most unhinged deck builder on the internet. So if you have a crazy, wacky idea you think nobody can build, challenge me in the comments down below. The one with the most upvotes, I have to build. And of course, while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate it. Now, of course, any good psychological manipulation begins with the pledge, where we're going to have 2 commanders to choose from: Duskana, the Rage Mother, and Javi, the All-Father. As a pregame action, you're going to need to determine the parental angle you're going to need to work in order to bring maximum psychological emotional trauma back to your opponent. If they have mommy issues, go with Duskana, the Rage Mother. Her name itself evokes violence, which could bubble up some emotional trauma your opponent has tried to bury. When they enter the battlefield, draw a card for each creature in our custody with base power and toughness 2/2. Duskana cares about creatures with base power toughness 2/2, small creatures like a mother would. And of course, it is just a small change in our verbiage, but we're going to say in our custody instead of under our control. It just makes it work better. Now, speaking of custody, if they have daddy issues, Javi the Allfather works perfectly. He cares about historic cards. All dads like history. And whenever Javi or another legendary creature in our custody dies, we're going to replace them very quickly. Just like how your dad probably replaced your mom with someone with lesser mana value or age, if you see what I did there. And now that we've picked the perfect commander to help set the stage, it's time to move on to phase 2 of the plan. The turn. We're not being subtle anymore. We're going to reenact their parents' divorce card by card until our opponent is psychologically broken. We're going to first remind them of the happy days when mother and father got along, thanks to Wedding Ring, for 2 and 2 white, binding us to an opponent, giving us card draw and life gain until it no longer benefits us. Maybe after years of a long marriage or a child, it's worn down, leaving us in a tenuous truce where we're staying together, but only until the child is old enough to know what's going on. And your opponent is reminded of that, all the fighting that goes on during a divorce proceeding, thanks to bitter feud, which we put between 2 players, and then maybe an epic confrontation or a duel for dominance or a custodial fight. Next, we remind them of the long legal process that divorce is, thanks to cards like Court of Ardenvale, Bring to Trial, Trial of a Time Lord, and Trial of Solidarity, helping them remember that they're going to have to pick a side between mother and father, or face the council's judgment or mob's verdict, determining who's going to be their council guardian. Of course, holidays are often the worst for children of divorce, thanks to the bitter reunion between mother and father, where both sides are tempting you with different gifts to make them out to be your favorite parent. Of course, these truces never last past dawn, leaving the child feeling nothing but anger, burning anger, ancestral anger, even being blind with anger until they shed tears of rage, which brings us to the third act, the prestige, the final blow in destroying our opponents psychologically. The happily ever after that every child dreams of has been erased due to the parents breaking their ties, and finally the perfect family unit being fragmented. Now, of course, playing the cards is one thing, but we also want psychological cues to implant in our opponents to remind them that their parents are divorced. Take, for instance, Stand or Fall, a 4-mana enchantment that says, at the beginning of our combat, separate all creatures defending player controls into 2 piles. Only creatures in the pile of that player's choice may block this turn. Really focus on the separating aspect of this card when you read it out loud. Maybe an example in casual conversation, you can say, wow, you're really good at separating. It must be genetic. This reminds your opponent of the fact their parents are divorced. Another example is Jared Carthalion, true heir. Really emphasize the fact that Jared is the true heir. You can do this by saying something like, speaking of true heir, isn't your dad leaving all his money to your stepbrother instead of you? This will remind your opponent that he's from a broken home and that his dad loves his new son more than him. So now that our opponents are destabilized mentally, how do we win? Well, Duskana the Rage Mother cares about daughters, heirs, and mother bears, 2/2 creatures that she bumps up to 5/5s to swing in for big damage. That's awesome. We can win that way. Of course, Javi the Allfather cares about mom, son, dog, classic family unit, goes infinite with Safi, Eric's daughter, because you sacrifice her, you target the Javi. The Javi dies, he brings back the Safi. It's cool. And Grandpa is here too, just to make a perfect family unit, which your opponent will be sad to see die over and over and over again, reminding them of their own trauma around their own family being broken up and split apart. And, the promise of getting back together, but it falls through. Classic. Now, a summary for those of you who have ADHD. First, we're going to pick a commander, mother or father, whichever your opponent is psychologically weakest to. Then remind them of the divorce with cards like Stand or Fall, separating creatures, Bitter Reunion like the holidays, or Tenuous Truce, reminding your opponent of when mom had you for the weekend, but dad had you the rest of the week. And now our opponents are beginning to second guess themselves, with us continuing to reinforce that with regular, everyday conversation, not aimed at psychological manipulation. Of course, until Duskana and our 2/2s are strong enough to swing in as 5/5s for lethal, thanks to us separating their blockers from Stand or Fall, and defensively separating their attacking creatures with Fight or Flight, reinforcing the fact that their parents are in fact separated themselves. Now, of course, the final way to win is that therapy is expensive, meaning they won't be able to buy the new Final Fantasy Collector boosters, saving you preemptively from a jumbo cactuar coming right at your face because, hey, a win is a win. But that does bring us to the end of the video. So if you liked it, leave a like. If you subscribe, subscribe. If you want to come hang out with us, join the Discord. It is linked in the description down below. And finally, shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You are the reason parents are getting back together. Thank you so much for supporting me and continuing to support me. And finally, if you have something you want me to build, leave it in the comments down below. Whatever has the most upvotes, I have to build. I hope to see you in the next one. Peace out.